Today we're reading Babe, the Gallant Pig, Chapter 5. It's called Keep Yellin, Young'un. Mrs. Hoggett shook her head at least a dozen times. For the life of me, I can't see why you do let that pig run all over the place like you do. Round and round the yard he do go, chasing my ducks about, shoving his nose into everything. Shouldn't wonder but what he'd be out with you and Fly moving the sheep about along before long. Why don't you just shut him up? He's running his flesh off. He won't never be fit for Christmas, Easter, more like. What'd you call him? Just Pig, said Farmer Hoggett. A month had gone by since the village fair, a month in which a lot of interesting things had happened to Babe. The fact that perhaps most concerned his future, though he didn't know it, was that Farmer Hoggett had become very fond of him. He liked seeing the piglet pottering around happily about a yard with Fly, keeping out of mischief as far as he could tell, if you didn't count moving the ducks around. He did this now with a good deal of skill, the farmer noticed, even to the extent of being able once to separate the white ducks from the brown, though that must have just been a fluke. The more he thought about it, the less Farmer Hoggett liked the idea of butchering pig. The other developments were in Babe's education. Despite herself, Fly had found that she took pleasure and pride in teaching him the ways of a sheepdog, though she knew that, of course, he would never be fast enough to work sheep. Anyway, the boss would never let him try. As for Ma, she was back in the flock, her foot healed, her cough better. But all the time she had been shut in the box, Babe had spent every moment that Fly was out of the stables chatting to the old ewe. Already he understood, in a way Fly never could, a sheep's point of view. He longed to meet the flock, to be introduced. He thought it would be extremely interesting. Do you think I could, Ma? Could what, young'un? Well, come and visit you when you go back to your friends. Oh, you could do easy enough. You only got to go through the bottom gate and up the hill to the big field by the lane. You don't know what farmer would say, though, or that wolf. Once Fly had slipped quietly in and found him perched on the straw stack. Babe, she said sharply, you're not talking to that stupid thing, are you? Why, yes, Mom, I was. Save your breath, dear. It won't understand a word you say. Bah, said Ma. For a moment, Babe was tempted to tell his foster mother what he had in mind, but something told him to keep quiet. Instead, he made a plan. He would wait for two things to happen. First, for Ma to rejoin the flock, and then, after that, for market day, when both the boss and his mom would be up out of the way. Then he would go up the hill. Towards the end of the very next week, the two things had happened. Ma had been turned out, and a couple of days after that, Babe watched as Fly jumped into the back of the Land Rover and it drove out of the yard and away. Babe's were not the only eyes that watched its departure. At the top of the hill, a cattle truck stood half hidden under a clump of trees at the side of the lane. As soon as the Land Rover had disappeared from sight along the road to the market town, a man jumped hurriedly out and opened the gate to the field. Another man backed the truck into the gateway. Babe, meanwhile, was trotting excitedly up the hill to pay a visit to the flock. He came to the gate at the bottom of the field and he squeezed under it. The field was steep and curved, and at first he couldn't see a single sheep. But then he heard a distant drumming of hooves, and suddenly the whole flock came galloping over the brow of the hill and down toward him. Around them ran two strange collies, lean, silent dogs that seemed to float effortlessly over the grass. From high above came the sound of a thin whistle, and in easy partnership the dogs swept around the sheep and began to drive them back up the slope. Despite himself, Babe was caught up in the press of jostling, bleating animals and carried along with them. Around him rose a chorus of panting, protesting voices, some shrill, some hoarse, some deep and guttural, but all saying the same thing. Wolf! Wolf! Cried the flock in dazed confusion. Small by comparison and short in the leg, Babe soon fell behind the main body, and as they reached the top of the hill, he found himself right at the back in company with an old sheep who kept crying, Wolf! Wolf! More loudly than other. Ma! He cried breathlessly. It's you! Behind them, one dog lay down at a whistle, and in front of the flock checked. The front of the flock checked as the other dogs steadied them. In the corner of the field, the tailgate and wings of the cattle truck filled the gateway, and two men waited, sticks and arms outspread. Oh, hello, young'un, puffed the old sheep. Fine day you chose to come, I'll say. What is it? What's happening? Who are these men? Said Babe. Rustlers, said Mom. Them sheep rustlers. What do you mean? Thieves, young'un. That's what I do mean. Sheep stealers. We'll all be in that truck afore you can blink your eye. What can we do? Do? Ain't nothing we can do unless we can slip past here this here wolf. She made as if to escape, but the dog behind darted in and she turned back. Again, one of the men whistled and the dog pressed. Gradually, held against the headland of the field by the second man and the dog, the flock began to move forward. Already the leaders were nearing the tailgate of the truck. "We'm beat," said Ma mournfully. "You run for it, young'un." "I will," thought Babe, "but not the way you mean." Little as he was, he suddenly felt not fear, but anger, furious anger that the boss's sheep were being stolen. My mom's not here to protect him, so I must, he thought to himself bravely. And he ran quickly around the hedge side of the flock, jumping into the bottom of the tailgate, turning to face them. "Please," he cried, "I beg you, please don't come any closer. And if you would be so kind, dear sensible sheep." His unexpected appearance had a number of immediate effects. The shock of being so politely addressed stopped the flock in its tracks, and the cries of "Wolf" changed to murmurs of "Isn't he lovely? Proper little gentleman." Ma had told them something of her new friend, and now to see him in the flesh and to hear his well-chosen words released them from the dominance of the dogs. They began to fidget and look about for an escape route. This was open for them when the men, cursing quietly, for above all other things they were anxious to avoid too much noise, sent the flanking dog to drive the pig away, and some of the sheep began to slip past them. Here's a picture. Next moment, all was chaos. Angrily, the dog ran at Babe, who scuttled away, squealing at the top of his voice in a mixture of fright and fury. The men closed on him, sticks raised. Desperately, he shot between the legs of one, who fell with a crash, while the other, striking out madly, hit the rearguard dog as it came to help, sent it yowling. In half a minute, the carefully planned raid was ruined. The sheep scattered everywhere. "Keep yelling, young'un," bawled Ma as she ran beside Babe. "They won't ever stay here with that row going on." And suddenly all sorts of things began to happen as those deafening squeals rang out over the quiet countryside. Birds startled in the trees. Cows in nearby fields began to gallop about. Dogs in distant farms began to bark. Passing motorists stopped and stared. In the farmhouse below, Mrs. Hoggett heard the noise as she had on the day of the fair. She stuck her head out the window and saw those rustlers, their truck, galloping sheep, and Babe. She dialed 999, but then talked so long that by the time a patrol car drove up the lane, the rustlers had long gone. Snarling at each other and their dogs, they had driven hurriedly away, and not one single sheep to show for their pains. "You won't believe it," cried Mrs. Hoggett when her husband returned from market. "But we had rustlers just after you'd gone, it were. Come with a huge cattle truck, they did. The police said they seen the tire marks in the gateway, and a chap in the car seen the truck go by in a hurry. And there's been lots of it about. He gave the alarm, he did. Kept screaming and shrieking enough to bust your eardrums. We should have lost every sheep on the place if it weren't for him. 'Twas him we got to thank." "Who?" said Farmer Hoggett. "Him," said the wife, pointing at Babe, who was telling Fly all about it. "Don't ask me how he got there or why he done it. All I knows is he saved our bacon. And now I'm going to save his. He's staying with us just like another dog. Don't care if he gets as big as a house, because if you think I'm going to stand by and see him butchered after what he done for us today, you got another thing coming. What do you say to that?" A slow smile spread over Farmer Hoggett's long face.